Sí,
Great.
perfecto. Súper, entonces damos el inicio a este encuentro que se llama Diálogos por Palestina, un encuentro virtual que venimos realizando, esta es nuestra tercera versión y tenemos el honor de contar con Zoe Lafferty. Rocío will do the translation, so I'm doing the Spanish part. Y bueno, ella nos contará mejor quién es y qué hace, pero estamos muy contentas de poder tener esta instancia de diálogo, sobre todo considerando las diferentes personas que están implicadas en el quehacer artístico desde una perspectiva política y activista vinculada con Palestina. Así que bienvenida, Zoe. Rocío, te doy la palabra para que puedas hacer la traducción al inglés.
I mean, I can start off maybe with exactly what you mentioned in terms of working with artists in Palestine and specifically with the Freedom Theatre. The Freedom Theatre is like an epic story, which I can go into detail with. But I will just start by mentioning like how I connected with the Freedom Theatre. So I was I can't remember the exact age, but let's say it was 2008. And I was in drama school and I was in the process of graduating from drama school. And I'd taken a placement in New York. I'm British, in case the accent is not obvious. And I'd taken a placement in New York. And this is where I met Giuliano Mercamis, who is the co-founder of the Freedom Theatre and the artistic director at that time. Do you need me to pause for translation? Okay, great. And so, as I mentioned, yeah, I was at drama school and everything was about being like the star, Hollywood, TV, and I didn't want to do this at all. And I met Giuliano, and he's like Che Guevara of theatre. And so I was like, okay, what do you do? Where do you do it? Where are you going to? And he told me about the Freedom Theatre and about Palestine. And so that was in 2008. And I begun working with the theatre at the end of 2009. And so that's really for me where it began. And you know, I don't know how much people know about the Freedom Theatre, but across those 14 years, you know, the theatre has grown hugely, but there's also been many attacks on the theatre, a lot of censorship. And as part of that, quite early on in 2011, I worked with Giuliano on a production called Alice in Wonderland, and he was murdered after that production. Um, and so for me, like, you know, this was a moment where I really understood, like, let's say the power of theatre and the danger of theatre. Yeah. So yeah, I think that that's it. And now it's sort of, I've been working with the theatre for 14 years. It's been many different parts of this journey, working with many different artists from Janine and Janine Camp. And it's really been like the most informative part of my, let's say, working on artistic life, and the place that I always feel is a home. And the Freedom Theatre and Giuliano and the artists there have taught me many things, but one of the most important things is the use of culture as a form of resistance, as a form of fighting back. The Freedom Theatre was founded by two people. One, Giuliano Mercamis, who was an artist and activist and was, you know, in the end murdered for his work as an artist. And the second person is Zakaria Zubeidi, who is one of the leaders of the armed resistance. Zakaria Zubeidi.
Zakaria Zubeidi.
And he was one of the leaders of the armed resistance, and they came together sort of to build this idea of cultural resistance. And I think this is really important, especially like I come from, you know, Britain, and certainly I know the similarities in Europe and USA. You know, people love this idea of putting down armed resistance and doing arts. But no, the Freedom Theatre is this isn't the belief. The belief is that there are many ways to resist. Arms is one of them, culture is another one of them, boycott is another one of them, and therefore it's in a way a foundation and a place to celebrate all of these ways of standing up to oppression. I mean, I can talk to you about the Freedom Theatre for many hours, so I don't, maybe there's something more specific within it you'd like me to talk about, or something else, I don't know. Okay. Oh, I think that let's say I always believed that art had a role in fighting for change, but the challenge is how to be a young person and know the way to do this. Especially, you know, as I mentioned, I'm from Britain. Our drama school was all about Shakespeare and Chekhov and Ibsen. It was never about what are you going to fight for as an artist. So I think that Giuliano was a very important part of understanding and giving me the tools to be able to do this. And I don't think that that's something that begins and ends. Like, still to this day, for me, one of the joys of working in this area, let's say, is that it's always a process of learning. I always get to meet new people like you guys, and learn different contexts, different ways of doing, and therefore I don't see it as something that has ever stopped. Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's always shifting and changing with the Freedom Theatre, because also, the Freedom Theatre is training new artists and bringing in, new people, and the situation is often changing, from moment to moment at the Freedom Theatre, the situation can be changing. And even as artistic directors, there was Juliana Merkamis, then there was Nabil Arai, now there's Ahmad Tabasi. So, also who's leading, and what they're interested in, what they're doing shifts what we are all doing and changes it. What I do also massively changes depending on where the attacks are. So, for example, right now, Mustafa Shetter, who's the Freedom Theatre's producer, is being held hostage by the Israelis. He's been held hostage since December. So what I'm doing slightly shifts and changes because he's also not there. So it's trying to step in and see how to support the areas of his work. For me, one of the biggest personal shifts with the theatre is that Israel will no longer let me go to Palestine. They won't let me enter. So one of the biggest shifts on a personal level is that I can't be in Jenin camp anymore. And that's added a lot of personal complications and practical complications. And at the same time, there are some positives to this because, for example, like I can normally be in a place that has good internet, where the electricity isn't cut, where there aren't invasions, and that in some ways has added a strength. Yeah. Yeah. It's a complicated one. You know, the goal of the Freedom Theatre is to end military occupation. It's to end Israeli apartheid. It's to, stop genocide. Therefore, these are the goals, the main goals for justice, for the right of return of refugees. I'll stop there because the sentence will get very long otherwise. So I think that, we mustn't lose sight of that. And at the same time, it's a very strange and interesting moment to have this nomination. And it's very important because maybe that means that there is more pressure on, for example, Mustafa being released from prison. Maybe it means that there is less chance that they will take Tabassi and put him in prison. So, in a hopeful sense, maybe something like this helps to protect the team a little bit. And I think, me and Tabassi put together, let's say, an announcement on the nomination. And it's this moment where you really go back and you realize, like, for example, Giuliano, who gave his life to this theatre, I think at least 14 times members of the team have been taken by the Israeli army. You realize how many people in Jenin and in Palestine have fought and given for this theatre, and how many people around the world have done that as well. And so it was a nice moment to really think about, like, what a massive collective effort it has been to build the Freedom Theatre and to keep the Freedom Theatre going. I think you don't always know if people are nominated. We do because the person who nominated told us. But we also know some of the other nominations, and there's many Palestinian organizations, journalists who are nominated. And this is very important as well, that it's not just the Freedom Theatre as a Palestinian organization, but others and other individuals and organizations as well. But I think we're the only theatre. But we don't know. I said, I think we're the only theatre. But at the same time, we don't know the nominations. Lots of people might be nominated, but we don't know. But all of this to say, like, we mustn't lose focus on the goals, the big important goals, and the big important fights. Yeah. So we, oh yes, here you go, sorry. So we've developed a whole entire project and website dedicated to this question, because it seems to be, you know, coming up again and again, and especially when the Freedom Theatre is attacked or members of the team are taken by the Israeli army. So we developed a project, and it's called the Cultural Intifada. And it's called this because Giuliano would always say the third intifada should be a cultural intifada, and that culture must be in the next intifada. And I will drop you the link, so you have it and you can go and explore, because it has many, many different things. One of the things it has is 14 demands against cultural genocide and censorship of Palestinian artists. And I'll talk you through I won't talk you through all 14 because we'll be here 9 hours, but I'll talk you through some of them. For example, the first one is asking people to uphold truth. What we're seeing so much, again, I'm not quite sure of the context. Yeah, great. It's up on the screen now. I'm not quite sure of the context where you are, but I know in Britain, Europe, US, there is so much misframing, misunderstanding. Sometimes that's intentional, sometimes that is on purpose, you know, but around the situation, you know, not suggesting, for example, this begun on 7th of October and not acknowledging the 100 years of settler colonialism, calling it conflict rather than, again, settler colonialism, apartheid, genocide. So this is the first demand, is really like about upholding the truth. And number 2 is around stopping the killing of artists, stand against killing of artists. And, you know, people might think, okay, but what can I do against Israel killing artists? Well, in Britain, we are massive contributors to the arms trade, and therefore actually getting your union to stand against giving Israel weapons is a big thing that you can do. You can, if you scroll down a bit on the screen, yes, so that's just giving you a bit of a brief outline of how the artists that are being killed, etc., etc. And then if you keep going down, you'll see like suggestions of what people can do around this, spreading the words of artists who have been killed, holding vigils in cultural spaces for artists who've been killed. So as I said, standing against the weapons trade if your country is complicit in that.
Quería contarles sobre Valparaíso. Todos los sábados nosotros nos paramos en el Muelle Prat a protestar y a funar, como decimos acá, a los barcos de la MSC, que se supone, no sabemos si vienen cargados con materiales, con productos químicos para fabricar bombas, que pasan cargados o los cargan acá. En ese trabajo estamos haciendo estos días. Paramos todos los sábados. Pocas personas, muchas personas, pero ya ha tomado, tiene presencia, por lo menos en Valparaíso. Santiago también ha tomado esta información y a veces viajan desde Santiago a apoyar en el Muelle Prat. Eso como un pequeño resumen sería.
Amazing. Add. Yes, and I think that this is what is really, for me, very important and powerful. So the examples that we're listing on the website, they are what people are doing all around the world. It's not examples connected to the Freedom Theatre. It's what people and often artists are doing all around the world. And so, for example, now we can add this to the website as an example to give people ideas, inspiration. Because I think that, what we're seeing around the world is such an incredible uprising against what's happening to Palestinians and against genocide and settler colonialism. And therefore, of course, it is horrendous. It is, they're just not, I don't have the words personally to describe how awful what is happening is. And at the same time, to see so many people finding so many creative ways to say no to this is also very important. And we're seeing in Britain, like, people from all different races, religions, backgrounds, coming together and saying no to the genocide in Palestine, but also no to Islamophobia, no to censorship, no to racism, no to police brutality. And so, like, this thing that's happening to Palestinians in this part of the world, and also like our own politics, our own oppressions in Britain, is people are standing up against all of it together. And I think that that's really, really important. And for me, I suppose what's happened on a personal level by working at the Freedom Theatre is that artists in Palestine and friends in Palestine have taught me so much about fighting for rights. And I feel that now what we're seeing is that Palestinians have inspired like the whole world to like stand up. And I think that that's really important. Yeah. And I think, in Britain, we say, like, people will say, oh, we're standing in solidarity with Palestine. And for me, I'm like, no, 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 no. Palestine stood in solidarity with us and taught us, even in the moment of genocide, in such an awful moment, Palestinians stood in solidarity with the British or the Americans or the European, and taught people how to fight back against their awful governments. And so I think it's always important to look at it like that. Yeah. And of course, not to state the obvious, but Britain is a colonizer. It is a country that is war producing. It is a country that colonized Palestine before it became Israel. So or the Israelis colonized. So I think that this is a really, we are in Britain a massive, massive part of the problem, both historically and continue to be until this day. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll put the link again, but if it's of interest, do go here, because it's us trying to answer this question of like, what can people do? So yeah. Yes. So I suppose outside of the Freedom Theatre in Palestine, I've always worked with different artists who are facing, whether it's invasion, colonialism, various forms of like oppression, attacks. And so Artists on the Front Line, I suppose, was a way to kind of formalize that work. My background is a theatre director, but actually I'm so often not working in theatre or with people in theatre. And therefore, I also wanted to find like a space where, you know, it's a combination between citizen journalism, audio, virtual reality, theatre, protest, street performance, because I also feel like these boxes that you get like stuck in are also a way to stop us imaginating and stop us collaborating somehow. For me, the starting point is normally like meeting people or meeting someone, and that's it. And they might be an artist or they might not. They might do something completely different. And that's normally the starting point. And then it's the story that
Interesante.
the story that they want to tell. And then it's asking, okay, what's the audience? And therefore, what medium might be best for this? And then there's like a question that we're not asking, it's just there, which is, what are the obstacles? Sometimes that's borders, sometimes that is censorship, that is, you know, the challenges of how to access an audience who will be in a very specific space, you know, invasion, isolation. So that often is a massive deciding factor in how to tell a story. And I love theatre. I love it. I would make theatre every day, all day, but it's a very slow medium. It's a very expensive medium. If you want to tour work internationally, it's often very, very complicated. And therefore, you know, it's 2024. There are so many great tools that we can be using that, in a way, us have the underlying values of theatre, but allow a story to go somewhere quicker, allow a story to go somewhere because you don't need to travel through a physical border, etc. And also for me, one thing I'm really interested in is considering like new ways of let's say working, but just to explain that a little bit more, I think, you know, so often I felt as an artist, you're trying to fight these, you know, against these huge things, and yet somehow in your micro system of working, you're continuing to, how to say it, you're continuing to repeat the same quite toxic systems. So I'm very interested also to find ways that we can be, you know, looking at a better, more healthy practices on a micro scale. So we're not just always talking about fighting the big things and yet not considering what we can be doing on a much, much smaller scale. But I feel like you always have to be kind of doing both at the same time. And the cultural intifada is like a bit of an example of this. Like, yes, we want people to go and like occupy a theater and say no to censorship and like hold the space for like a month. And at the same time, if you're going to write a statement in solidarity with Palestine, then, you know, use the correct words, like, you know, on a very micro scale, like make sure that that's written in a way that is also standing up to truth. So again, it's kind of a very, very small thing that you can be doing, or you can go really, really big, but both are part of the same conversation and both need to happen. Yes.
Hola, quisiera preguntar, bueno, a Chile vino Tobasi el año pasado, James Tobasi, y compartió un poco la experiencia del Freedom Theater en cuanto a metodología. Entonces quería preguntar si la perspectiva de la metodología es multiplicable. La idea es apropiarse del método para contribuir a la resistencia en cada territorio. Pregunto como practicante del otro método muy coherente que es el teatro del oprimido, porque acá con Patricia, Sandra, otras compañeras, queremos multiplicar la perspectiva de lucha del Freedom Theater, reivindicando la tercera intifada y la lucha contra las opresiones territoriales también. Entonces, ¿cómo ha sido esa experiencia previa y cómo la ven?
I mean, this is a huge question, and it's a question that I can't answer for you, because you know your context, you know what you want to achieve, and you know the people that you're working with, you know the problems you're tackling. So in a way, I think that question is for you to answer. I'll stop and then I'll add some more to the thought. But I would say at the same time, for me, you know, as I said at the beginning, a lot of what the Freedom Theatre and the work at the Freedom Theatre has informed everything I do. But also, I'm very lucky to have worked with, you know, and met, I want to say artists, but actually all sorts of people, human rights, lawyers, armed resistance fighters, journalists, you know, etc. In many, many, many different places, whether that's Afghanistan, Yemen, Ukraine, Britain, and therefore for me, it's a combination of many things, learning from many, many different people, that for me, I'm always sort of combining and then finding my own path with the people I'm working with. For me, it's not really ever about like the methodologies, whether that's like Stanislavski or Van Gogh or, you know, I don't know, theatre of the press. It's not about these things in their like singular, you know, bubbles. It's who you're working with and what you're trying to fight, and finding like whatever you can to do that with. And therefore, you know, it's always different and it's always shifting and changing. Like, to give an example, you know, at drama school, I spent 3 years learning how to do Shakespeare. This is how you do Shakespeare. And then I went to Palestine, and, you know, suddenly you're in a context of war, and where, you know, there's a deep belief in God, and I mean that in a good sense, you know, a deep belief in God. And that's suddenly the moment that I actually understood Shakespeare, because Shakespeare always has God and it always has, you know, war, not always, but quite often. And therefore, I thought it was so funny that the British wanted to teach me for 3 years how to do Shakespeare and how they do Shakespeare and how they're correct in their Shakespeare. And suddenly I realized that, like, you know, we totally missed the point. And so I learned about Shakespeare in Palestine. I mean, I also learned that Shakespeare is a way that British love to colonize the world and tell everyone this is how you have to do theatre. And, you know, it's like this very elitist thing, you know, so there's all of these layers always with, you know, I'm just using Shakespeare as an example, but also in the end, it doesn't matter. It's, for me, just what are we fighting for, and what are the skills do we have, and how can we do that? and what does the moment demand? Like, as I said, I'm a theatre director, and I just worked to build a website that talks about like how to take action, because that's what felt that this moment demanded, which was many people are asking, what can we do? And I was like, okay, we need to answer this question. And therefore that was that archive process was what was needed in the moment. One of the things we're experiencing now in Britain is theatres will not do Palestinian work. They're cancelling Palestinian work. They're censoring Palestinian work. And therefore, this is not as the Freedom Theatre. This is more a collective of artists in Britain. What we do now is we occupy the theatres. And we take the space. For example, we did it, the Barbican. We took over the space for 2 hours and we occupy it, and we put the arts festival on. And yes, the police are called, and we have to have all these strategies around police and safety and stuff. So it's a totally different set of skills than maybe if you're invited to a theatre legally to do a performance. So I suppose each day it's a different thing, depending.
Hola, hola a todos, a varias gente que conozco. Hi Zoe, great to see you again. Nos conocimos con Zoe en Francia cuando viajaron con la obra que ella dirigió, donde actúa el Tobassi, en varios teatros y varios festivales en Francia, y justamente tiene que ver con lo que estaba comentando, que en algunos de esos teatros se impidió censurar a la obra. Se tuvo que levantar el medio artístico reclamando no solamente a la institución política, sino también cultural, el porqué de la censura. I was just telling them about the experience of censorship you experienced actually in France when you traveled with Tobassi and your work in October. I wanted to ask you a question about whether in some countries that you have been present in or collaborated with, have you had examples of the culture and theatrical field actually finding a way to put pressure on the cultural institution for them to program more Palestinian work, or to make them more present inside their programmation? Because actually I think that's the problem we have in France. Even though they're not censoring, they're not taking the risk either.
Yes,
Quería hacerle la pregunta porque también pensando en Chile como en Francia, si ha tenido ejemplos en otros países del medio cultural y teatral organizándose y encontrando formas de ponerle presión encima a la institución cultural, pensando, no sé, en el Santiago Amil y otras instituciones con mucha visibilidad, para dar visibilidad al trabajo sobre Palestina, porque si bien no necesariamente censuran, tampoco se atreven a programar, entonces no dan visibilidad.
I think there's always two approaches. One is from the inside. Let's see, when I say the inside, I mean like the kind of more formal routes, and then one is from the outside. I would say that in the more formal way, especially in France, you know, we have this amazing producing company, Sans On The Tea, who have really like stood by this production and, you know, have fought to keep programming it. And therefore a partner like this who are just relentless in making sure that it continues are so invaluable. And then I'll talk more about the outside way. And then, of course, there's the outside way, which isn't possible to do as a freedom theatre, but I can do as like a British person in a more activist area, which is, as I said, like, let's stop asking theatres. Let's occupy those spaces. There's, you know, we're going to go forever begging for little crumbs from these big institutions, but actually get a team of you on a Saturday afternoon. They can't stop. They cannot stop you. If, for example, with the Barbican, we were a team of 30 artists ish, and maybe 200 audience came, they can't stop you entering the building and doing a public event. So that's very tricky as a freedom theatre, because you need visas and you need people to also be safe, because we're talking about potential police brutality, and you know, that's pretty complicated for Palestinian artists, and you know, different people are much more vulnerable for that. But if you can, for me, this is it. Let's stop asking permission and let's just start demanding, taking over spaces, occupying spaces, doing theatre outside of theatres. Just a final thought on that. We're now seeing texts from artists in Jenin being read in protests while arms factories are being occupied, the liberation zones in universities. And for me, these are our cultural spaces. Like, they are the most interesting and the most exciting cultural spaces. Even, for example, I've been invited to do teach-ins in the liberation zones in the universities that would never, ever maybe invite me normally. And if they did, I would be so censored for what I can say. And now the students, they're occupying the space, and I can go and I can say exactly what I want, and we can meet and we can communicate. And this is, for me, this is, you know, of course, this has a massive history of people doing this, but it's also the future, and it's where we need to go. Stop asking permission. And just a final thought, but hopefully it will kind of round things off. For me, that's why it's such an honor to be invited into a space with people in Chile, because you are experts in protest, experts in civil disobedience, in activism, in political arts. So for me, it's also really an honor to be here and to, you know, maybe connect with people who have a lot of expertise that I can learn from and take those on into my occupying British theatres or doing whatever tomorrow.
Yo no sé cómo se levanta la mano esa amarillita, así que levanto el dedito desde acá, no tengo idea, ¿no? Así que disculpes por eso. Quería yo contarles solamente que trabajamos nos conseguimos en el Parque Cultural Ex Cárcel, que se declara espacio libre de apartheid. Entonces se pone a disposición de lo que se quiera trabajar por Palestina en general. Entonces, quiero contar dos pies de esta historia. Uno, que tenemos un colectivo que se llama 29 de noviembre, que tiene ese nombre por ser el Día Internacional de Solidaridad con Palestina, instaurado por las Naciones Unidas, imagínense. Eso es una cosa. Y por el otro, instando al parque, ¿no es cierto?, que se preste para hacer actividades por Palestina. Generalmente cuando uno habla Palestina acá, generalmente la mirada es hacia Gaza, Gaza, pero se obvia un poco a Cisjordania. Y Jenin está en Cisjordania. Por lo tanto, habemos varios aquí que queremos agruparnos en el parque cultural, ya que es libre de apartheid, y mirar hacia Freedom Theater, que está en Cisjordania, que está en Jenin, para que la mirada también vaya hacia allá, no solo hacia Gaza. Estamos tratando de preparar una propuesta para el parque cultural que sea de apoyo, de amistad con Freedom Theater. Estamos recién empezando con eso. Está la compañera acá, Alejandra Sáez, Dariel, Sandra, varios más, que queremos darle forma a eso. Es un proyecto pequeño. Todavía no sabemos cómo vamos a funcionar. Eso sería, y es un gusto y un honor estar con Zoe. Eso.
That sounds fantastic. We have in this Cultural Intifada website, we have a part called The Revolution's Promise, and some actually wonderful friends in Chile have translated it into Spanish. And also, Alexandra, I think you also worked on some bits of the translation. And so please, if you want to use these texts, do. It's all about artists who have been censored or attacked, and it talks about Palestine, it talks about Jenin and Jenin refugee camp, but it also talks about Gaza, and it also talks about 48, and it talks about other areas of Palestine. So it really brings together many of the different stories from across the different parts of Palestine. So if that's of interest, please do use it. And hopefully that shines a light on Jenin and also connects it to Gaza and the different parts.
Bueno, y quería agradecerte, Zoe, por el tiempo, por la disposición. Voy a decirlo en español porque ya está la traductora con nosotros. También por compartir tus experiencias. Realmente es increíble lo que hace la labor del Freedom Theater. Creo que ha cimentado una semilla de insubordinación civil en el mundo. Justamente eso ha permitido que se replique en grupos y que la resistencia cultural, el apoyo hacia Palestina y lo que tú nos regalaste como reflexión. Finalmente no es el mundo que soporta a Palestina, al parecer está Palestina sosteniendo todas las luchas del mundo, es lo que ha terminado haciéndonos esta antifada cultural que estamos viendo. Así que muchas gracias por este encuentro y esperamos que puedan venir y tenerlos acá en Chile pronto.
Thank you all so much, and it's really been a pleasure to be here. And yes, hopefully we'll all connect up in new ways. So thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Chao, muchas gracias.
Chao, gracias a ustedes. Chao, chao.